Kind of the part of being a cinematographer is to understand different environments and how that affects our contrast and our subjects and our background. So to kind of touch on this subject and break it down in a simple way, I shot 2 scenes that are very drastically different, and one scene is going to have to take away light and the other scene is we're gonna have to put our own light and try to control it. Okay, so starting with this shot, this is your basic 3-point lighting. We have key, fill, and a hair light. This shot is obviously at nighttime, so I use those lights on the fence to motivate our key light, and that's where we're gonna start. So we discussed with our fake director that we need a relatively medium contrast ratio, around a 12:1, so we're not going super contrasty and we're also not going to go super high key. This is at nighttime, so our fill side is going to be way too dark 99% of the time, so we're going to bring in our own fill light, and that is just a 300x being shot through that frost material that I keep mentioning, and that is just giving us a little bit of color contrast and fill on the other side of our key side. I'll show you the difference between putting a little bit of fill in, and then for Heather's shot, I basically turned the fill down to 1%. The last thing that I did for the shot was put in a big, pretty bright bounce, and that's just giving the scene a little bit more realism and filling in our shadows and our background, and it's also hitting our subject where it's giving us a soft hair light on both of these subjects. Learning how these changes affect our contrast is super important. For this scene, we added light. Let's look at an example where we need to control and take away some light. I didn't know the person whose apartment this was really, so I needed to be really fast. So a light dome gave us a nice quality of light, super fast. And this gave us enough control where we can still play around with it and we don't have to put up many flags or need to use any other kind of diffusion. The second light that I used was the 22. I just put it kind of relatively behind her, and that's just wrapping her key light around her face a lot nicer. And then you can notice in this back room, I wanted to lift the levels a little bit, so I put the 300x back there and opened that window blind a little bit, so we're getting some really nice texture and depth because we see right through that room through the door. And that's doing a lot to give this shot some depth. To make this super easy for myself, I literally just placed a flag on the bathtub and like leaned it against the wall, and we were getting tight enough where we didn't see it, and this was giving us the perfect contrast ratio that matched our other shot, and I kind of just left it at it as is. Something that I do a lot is I'll just keep going, and sometimes I'll totally mess it up. So for this, I wanted to just stop, and I thought it looked good in that moment, so I just shot it as is. Of course, for this, I'm going to put a lot of contrast in our grade. So if you don't know what contrast ratios are, difference between your highlights and your shadows, specifically we're talking about on our subject for our key light versus our shadow side. So if we look at this false color chart, we can tell that we're getting a nice contrast ratio here. And then if you have like a 4:1 or an 8:1 contrast ratio, this is more of a high key lighting scenario. This is an example of a 8:1 contrast ratio. Our key light side is reading at a f4 and our shadow side is reading at a f1.4. So if we do the math, that is a 3-stop difference. So that's gonna make this an 8:1 contrast ratio. Films and TV shows that have a lot of drama will use higher contrast ratio than The Office or Ted Lasso because those are a little bit less dramatic than, of course, Game of Thrones, which is going to use higher contrast ratios to invoke that drama. And the last thing that I want to mention for this shot was that black door and her black makeup. Other than the lighting, if we took all the lighting away or whatever, we just had super basic lighting, we would still get contrast from her makeup and from the black door that's just already in our setting. A lot of the times contrast doesn't come from just the lighting or at all. It comes from production design and things that are already in your environment. So for this shot, I wanted to show something that uses contrast a little bit more creatively and less realistic. And the key to this shot specifically that I found was having a large light source. This light is incredibly bright, so we are going to use an ND filter to expose for that light to bring our background down. If we have a really bright light, we can expose for that light at 100%, and then that will bring whatever is not a highlight, it will bring it all the way down to where we will only see black. Before I forget to mention, I did have 2 V-flats behind me on the dark side, so we didn't have to shine that light so bright into my face. Please, if you have any feedback for how I can make these videos better, these shots, I'm completely learning with you guys, so just let me know.